Hello and welcome to Press Pass, and this is what we have lined up for you.
Let's talk to media as a whole and this need to rush to do shoddy jobs and then also use women and young women as your ultimate clickbait.
Questions loom as parallel investigations into Jacob Juma murder carries Kika law declared constitutional, and is this a kick in the gut for media or a much-needed jab in the arm of media outlets? No sit-ins at the IEBC offices today, but there is a planned rally on Madaraka Day, Wednesday, as a plot thickens around the IEBC disbandment. Tonight we'll have 5 panelists, but we'll start with 4 and different segments, and we'll explain why. And I'll start by introducing Bwana William Okech. He is a former commissioner from especially the complaints side of things at the Media Council of Kenya. Thank you for joining us this evening. And we have next to him Patience Nyange, first timer here on Press Pass. Thank you for joining us. She is a journalist by profession, has been from back in the day at Baraka FM, and also has had international experience as well with the BBC. Thank you for joining us. Macharia Gaido, independent journalist, thank you, sir, for joining us this evening. And Dr. Haron Mwangi, the CEO of the Media Council of Kenya. Now, last Monday on the 23rd of May, Mohammed Ali of Jichopevu and Dennis Onsarigo of The Lead aired exclusive footage giving details of Jacob Juma's murder. Unfortunately, the story that carried the day was a person of interest who was identified in the story. There was a lot of hue and cry as to why the investigative journalists decided to disclose the identity of the lady. Radio Africa's media personality Caroline Mtoko shared her views on her YouTube channel after the story aired, and it got quite the response. Just a short snippet of the 5-minute plus YouTube upload that was done by Caroline Mtoko. I think this was on Tuesday, right after the airing of this investigative piece by Mohammed Ali and Dennis Onsarigo. And I invited Mohammed Ali to join us on this particular panel, but he said not yet, as this is not the time. He has a sequel, a second part to the investigative piece, and he also gave me a perspective as to why they carried out the story, and I'll be explaining this. But let's get into it, and I'll start with the lady, Patience Nyange. While you were watching this particular investigative piece, what came to mind?
When I watched this investigative piece, my first reaction was disappointment. And I think dissatisfaction as well will come in place. The reason being, we had seen news before and actually understood that the person of interest here, who is Jacob Juma, died. So that was not news. He was killed, probably that was not news. And the biggest news for us at this point was who killed Jacob Juma. Right. And therefore, from the investigative piece, they tell us, of course, Mohammed, I mean, at this time when I say they, it's Mohammed together with Dennis Onsarigo, that they're telling us a few hours into his death. Yet, in this piece, we really don't, those small pieces don't add to that equation. So the questions that for me I felt like I needed to understand is who killed Jacob Juma was not answered. And even if I wanted to connect it for myself, the last few hours into Jacob Juma's death is not answered in that investigative piece. So for me, my first reaction was total disappointment, I will say. All right. Yes.
I'll get to something else more specific, especially the identification. But William, you're nodding your head as she speaks. Is it in agreement?
Yes, I am in concurrence, but also without belittling the importance of investigative journalism, because you are aware that as a fourth estate, it plays a very crucial role in terms of unraveling corruption, in terms of fighting crime. There is a value that investigative journalism plays. However, as much as you're doing that, the practitioners are required to play within the games. There is a framework that regulates what you do and how you do it. And specifically, I'll make a reference to the Media Council Act. There's a specific requirement that is in Section 3A that says, in the practice of that trade, as you go along that trade, you really need to be aware of the rights and the privacy of other people. Also, linked to that one also, there is a code of conduct for the practice of journalism, which also requires that if at all you're going to refer to someone in an unfavorable light, right, then one, you'll need to get comments from that person. Journalists also have an obligation to be humane and to be sympathetic to those whom they cover. So in this particular instance, their story did not stick to the issues. The issue, just as my colleague says, the issue was a death which was perpetrated on someone who's a public figure.
Right.
But then it kind of diverted. It went into issues which bordered on privacy of someone who's innocent.
Okay, we're talking about Kaburi La Wazi. That's actually what I was scrolling through to find, the Trail of Lies. And it aired on Monday of last week. And this is no attempt to be holier than thou. Muhammad Ali, Dennis Onsarigo, they both worked here. We've worked with them. They're journalists par excellence. We respect their work. However, many have raised the question. You've seen the clip, Masharia, by Caroline Toko, talking about the use of women as clickbait. Do you concur with this and your general feel as you watched?
To an extent, yes. But it's a complex situation because on one, as a journalist, there are legitimate grounds for establishing timelines in any investigation.
Right.
If somebody was killed, you want to know who he was with, where he was, what time, even what they did and what they talked about. What disturbed me about this particular one is what I saw like double standards. You expose the identity of this girl, you conceal the identity of others. Why? You know, why those double standards? And then there is the insinuation of something illicit brewing between the girl and Juma. And that now has become the talk. Instead of focusing on who killed Juma, we're focusing on what was this girl doing with Juma. And it you know, really is, I don't know whether that is the issue.
Right.
Yes, she's a person of interest, just like the taxi driver or his wife or Ahmed Nasiri, the lawyer, or anybody else he may have met
His last
within the relevant period.
Yes.
Even the people who he mentioned are planning to kill him in his Twitter feeds, they are persons of interest. And I'm curious what that I've not had any of them being interrogated by the police, but maybe some people are more equal than others. But the focus on this girl is disturbing because of the insinuations that have come about.
Yes. And Dr. Mwangi, since this story aired, has there been complaints, forged and filed with you?
Yes, we have received one complaint about the objectifying this lady. But besides that, I think there was a high level of subterfuge. And I think this lady was recorded as she was being interviewed by the driver. And she was not aware that she was being recorded. And I think it suggests that even the driver could have been induced in in one or the other,
right,
to kind of interview this lady.
Right.
So therefore there are a number of the ethical principles that the journalists are supposed to adhere to that were broken in that process. So the article or the clip was not, or the story was not objective. It was not impartial, and therefore again it kind of demeaned, basically the lady that became an object of this investigation.
All right.
And again, as Margaido has just said, there were many other people that were mentioned, and they were not brought to the fore in the conversation. So we wonder whether really this young woman that may have very little possibly to do with the death of Juma, maybe. Yes. Was given that kind of prominence in the coverage.
Okay, it is tricky, I would imagine, for an investigative journalist to have to disclose that we're recording this conversation. I mean, you're undercover in many ways. You either have a button camera or a camera with your biro as you record a conversation. So where do you draw the line?
I think subterfuge here, we need to look at, of course, every time you are interviewing your informer, basically, you must let them know that you're interviewing them. Subterfuge would only be allowed in very rare circumstances or cases where you know and you can prove that you could not get the information in any other way. And therefore you can go ahead and do it. Again, it must be a matter of public interest, really. So I'm not very sure that this level of investigation warranted this level of subterfuge in their work.
Okay, let me bring back Patience into this conversation. When you were sharing, you've actually shared your sentiments about this particular story, but you had especially misgivings about bringing out the lady and painting in bad light and further reaffirming some stereotypes or cementing some stereotypes within society.
It's unfortunate that this is the world that we live in, and it's unfortunate that this is the country that we live in, where it's a patriarchal society, and many a times women have been seen to be the target. And especially, I mean, I will ask myself this question, especially when I watch this clip. If she could give that information, the information that she gave to the taxi driver, why wouldn't she not give it to any other person? And yet, we actually go further, and we don't try to, at no point in that clip, we can actually see the journalist saying we actually tried to reach out to this lady, but she was not there to give us the information. So for me, I think she was used, as others will say, probably the weaker person in that clip, and they will easily continue to perpetuate the stereotypes that women, anytime there's a story and the story has woman in it, there's a woman in it, then the story takes a different angle altogether, and the story becomes juice, and the story sells better, as opposed to, I mean, what if we just use the taxi person? Why was there interest in Cheryl and not the taxi guy?
Well, she was with him in the last moments of his, supposedly of his life.
Yes, that is true. I think the point is this: why the focus on her, as opposed to all the others who have been mentioned? Now, let me pose this question: suppose it was a man who was with
Would it be the
Juma
same?
at that particular time. Would the conversation have taken the same route? It could have been anything. It could have been an innocent encounter. It could have been a business deal. It could have been a delivery of letters or something.
Yes.
But something. It has almost become a conclusion that there was something illicit about that meeting. But there has no proof at all has been offered of anything of the sort.
Would we be having this conversation had the name of the person of interest not been put out there?
I think had that name not been put out there, it would have helped the situation by sticking to the issues of investigations of someone who has just been killed under mysterious circumstances. But where now the track left the rail is where now the name, full names, two names of this particular person was disclosed. And I know there are those people who might argue that there was indeed some public interest in this issue in making that disclosure. Right. But the code is very clear. Unless it is with the consent of this person who is going to be affected, then such a disclosure should not be made. But then you'll also want to ask yourself, what is this balance between the private rights of an individual and the public's right to know certain information? I think there are authorities, and it has been established that a matter which is for public right, it is a public right if the public will be better off knowing it, and they'll be worse off not knowing it. Okay. In this particular case, you find that it was an issue of two adults having their own private arrangements to meet at a certain place, and a person being dropped. So you find that it goes beyond, it's an intrusion. All right. Into someone's private life.
Let me throw a span in the works, because I spoke to Mohammed Ali last evening when I was inviting him. He wasn't willing to come now because this is a story that is still unfolding, and he's still pursuing the second part of it at a time that will be disclosed later. But let's think of it this way, in this perspective. Let's say the identity of this lady was put out there to actually protect her. As we know sometimes how investigations might roll out, she might be put at the center of this whole drama and told that she was actually one of the choreographers. And there is actual reason to believe that this is the end of this particular story, or how they would have wished, at least. And this is from Mohammed Ali. Yes, he says
that's a quick one. In terms of protection of potential witnesses who are concerned with a subject issue of a criminal act, I think the laws are very clear. We have the Witness Protection Agency, which the moment investigations begin, if you have been identified as a person of high interest, either you have information firsthand, you witness a certain crime, then the DPP can always make an application for you to be protected. You're taken out to a safe house, so that at least your life is protected. Your identity can also be changed. You can even be moved to a different country. So I think the argument that you'll make this disclosure to protect this person does not fit in this particular case.
Can I also add just before? Okay, yeah, I mean, the damage has already been done. Okay. I mean, I will say it's too late. Because what was the hurry for you to reveal that piece of expose at that point? And did we really think about how much? Did we really anticipate that it was going to take the turn that it has taken? Think of the whole cyberbullying effect, you know? And then even now, we will have waited really. If there's a second part to that, why was there a need for us to do, I mean for them, for the journalists, to do the story at that point?
Of course, we know to get details on, especially when you're doing investigative stories, they don't just fall in place. You have to be patient, and it takes time.
Yeah, but Ali told you that privately. Mama told you that privately. But for all the people who watch that show, they are not aware of that background.
And Ali actually gave me the permission to share this information because he feels once the second part of this investigative piece is out, people will see and understand in his defense why he used her and actually identified her openly to protect her.
Then in that, well, we'll wait and see.
Yes.
But then, for me, then logically, he should have used her openly, with permission, on air, on screen. Why identify somebody in a shady way?
Okay.
Why not doing it openly and let her come out and say, yes, I'm the one, I was with him?
All right. As we conclude this...
Why would he use the driver, for example, to interview this lady? Why didn't he interview the lady himself?
Some would say it actually came off as an innocent conversation between a taxi driver who was well known to this lady, and they were having a conversation as...
That can't be true. That was taped. That was taped.
That's a question.
Yeah, that was taped.
You don't go around recording each other's conversations.
Yes. Right.
Eavesdropping in other people's conversations.
So in investigative journalism, that was wrong, you'd say, to
Yes.
use this taxi man to get information,
That was wrong.
to get to the truth?
Yes, and especially when, I mean, it will be right, after even recording the conversation before it went on air, it will be right for him to actually get to Cheryl and say, Cheryl, I have this piece of information that you actually recorded you with this driver, and because I'm carrying out this story, I'm interested in using this piece of work. And then, of course, Cheryl, by that time, she still has the right to say yes or no. So, I mean, it went on air without Cheryl's consent.
All right.
That is wrong.
You would have some recommendations in terms of your complaints that you would have on this particular issue. What would you recommend? We have the Media Council here and someone who's sat in the Complaints Commission.
I think for me, it's just probably to ensure that there is some strictness when it comes to the kind of work we do as journalists, and ensuring that even as we come out from maybe campus or college, with the knowledge that we have, we need to also put journalists, and especially investigative journalists, because of the kind of work that they do, and especially because of the sensitivity of the work that we do, that someone is actually watching. Someone is following this conversation and trying to say, if we get it wrong, let's raise an alarm. Because we have to stick to the rules of the game. There's no shortcut to this. Think about the breed of journalists that we want to mentor, and especially the people who look at Moha or look at other journalists, even you, Mark Masai, as a role model into this profession. They want to look at you and say, oh, he does this job, this is how he does it, this is how he thinks about his questions, this is how he interviews. We also want to ensure that we are bringing journalists and mentoring them in the right way. So my biggest recommendation will actually be to ensure that the code of ethics is not just there, but actually it's followed. Right. And when we violate the rules and ethics that are within the code of conduct, please, let's actually stop it and say we need to do something.
What I would say is that journalism, particularly investigative journalists, should have a lot of leeway to conduct investigations without unnecessary roadblocks.
Yes.
And I think the code of ethics and practice for the practice of the code of, what do they call it? The code of conduct or the practice in Kenya recognizes that it allows a certain degree of subterfuge where it is necessary. It allows recording conversations without permission of the person being recorded where it is necessary. That is collecting of information. But then, how you use that information should also be done in a responsible manner that might not harm innocent people or sources. The other thing is, I've been watching a lot of, now the girl aside, she has been the focus. There's been a lot, of course, of the media investigations into the Jacob murder, into the Jacob Juma murder. And that, I think, has been very impressive because a lot of the untruths or gaps seen in the police reports are being revealed.
Coming out.
However, I also feel that there's a danger of the media being misled or being misled by interested parties. We have seen a lot of revelations about how that murder took place and so on and so forth, details. But nobody has bothered to say how they got those details. We have been told about motorbikes chasing him. We have been told about pickaxes. We have been told about all kinds of things, a man with a gun, a man with, how they broke the windows. Nobody has bothered to reveal the source of that information. There has been, reports that he was murdered elsewhere and his body dumped there. Again, not a single indication of how that conclusion was arrived at.
Right.
And yet, those are now being presented as irrefutable facts. I think that is wrong. You can deal with theories and say this is one theory, this is another theory, this is another theory. But once you start presenting theories as facts, then we are treading on dangerous territory.
Right. I'd want to give Madam Patience the last word on this because she will be leaving for the next segment to have someone else come in conversation of the laws that govern our media houses and journalists. And what's the last word on this particular issue? He says there will be a second part, give him the benefit of a doubt, but looking forward.
Looking forward, I think journalism is a profession that needs to be respected by all. Need to be respected by the public who are the viewers and consumers of the information that we give them. At the same time, even for us as journalists, we need to be careful about the kind of work that we do, thinking about the impact of the kind of information that we give. So I think it's very important for us to think about strategically what is it that we want to give as the information to the public, and at the same time, let's respect this profession and think about it as one of the other professions, just like medicine and law.
All right, thank you for that. This segment ends here, but I'd like to end it with hoping that Mohammed Ali is watching, and he says it is quite strange that whenever they do an investigative piece together either with Dennis Onsarigo or John Allen Namu, he's the one who gets all the flack for it, and he reads actual mischief in it. And so let's give him a benefit of a doubt and look forward to the second part of his investigative piece that will be on KTN. If you missed the first part, it is on their YouTube page, just to get your own perspective and analysis of how the story has played out, because it's definitely not over. We take a short break. We'll be back talking laws of media. Welcome back to Press Pass, to the second segment. Call it a landmark ruling if you may, but whatever happened on Thursday last week from the High Court definitely had some ripple effect for the media. Judges Isaac Lenola, Mumbi Ngoye and Weldon Korir ruled that the Kenya Information and Communication Act and the Media Council Act 2013 are lawful. To get some context, let us watch the story by Sheila Sendeo.
We said that we have carefully read and considered the respective pleadings of the parties.
Presiding High Court Justice Isaac Lenaola, Judges Mumbi Ngugi and Weldon Korir handed the blow in a 108-page ruling, affirming that the Kenya Information and Communication Act of 2013 and the Media Council Act of 2013 were constitutional. The petitioners could only chalk up a partial victory.
With the exception of the above provisions, we are satisfied that the provision of the two acts impugned by the parties in the matter are in accord with the Constitution. Disposition in the event the petitions partly succeed to a very limited extent.
Just the extent to which only these two provisions on the Media Council Act were found to be unconstitutional. Section 3(2)(a) of the Media Council Act that states, in exercise of the right to freedom of expression, the media shall reflect on the interests of all sections of society. The judges found that this was an unjustifiable limitation to the right of freedom, and Section 6(2)(c) of the same Act that provides for the Media Council in exercise of its powers and functions to ensure the protection of national security, public health, and public morals.
It was our further finding that Section 6(2)(c) of the Media Council Act is unconstitutional for being couched in a manner that is vague and broad and that is likely to limit the freedom of expression.
The controversial legislation passed by Parliament in 2013 sparked outrage within the media, including street protests against what the media said was an attempt to silence critical reporting by a government-controlled regulator and threats of hefty fines. In the ruling, the judges retained the stiff punishments to be meted out on journalists and media houses that contravene the law and code of conduct under Section 38(1)(f) of the Media Council Act that allows the Media Complaints Commission to impose a fine of not more than 500,000 on a media house or not more than 100,000 on a journalist found to be in contravention, and Section H that allows the Commission to recommend the suspension or complete removal of a journalist from the register of practicing journalists, and under Section 102E of the Kenya Information and Communication Act that allows the Multimedia Appeals Tribunal to hand even heavier fines, 20 million shillings on a media house and 500,000 shillings on a journalist. In the judge's view, if such penalties are imposed after a fair hearing, then it's not a violation of the Constitution. And also, journalists and media houses ought to be prepared to face the consequences if they do what they ought not to.
That legislation does not concern county government functions, finances, or elections of county assembly members or executives. It touches solely on the regulation of the media, a function that is clearly vested by the Constitution in the national government. It is our finding further that there was no violation of the Constitution in the non-involvement of the Senate in the enactment of the two acts.
The judges further ruled that the President acted within his mandate in the Constitution in considering and assenting to the law. Sheila Sendeo, NTV.
The report by Sheila on Thursday of last week, and on Saturday, the Saturday Nation actually had a piece about this particular development. Blow to journalists as judges give nod to media laws, it headlined. You probably get grab a screenshot of this to my director. And yes, I'd like to introduce our new member of the panel, and that is Mercy Wanjao. She is the Principal Legal Officer at the Communications Authority. Thank you for joining us. Now, as you see, as you've heard that report, you've watched that report, you've seen some of the articles that have been written about interpreting the judge's ruling on Thursday of last week. Blow to journalists as judges give nod to media laws. What is your take on this?
Thank you, Mark. In 2013 December, the President assented to the Kenya Information Communications Amendment Bill, as well as the Media Bill, which are two pieces of legislation which really come in a very concurrent fashion because of the nexus that is made between the journalists and the platform on which they perform, which is the media enterprise. These laws were negotiated and brought up to be law as part of the process of affirming the constitutional guarantees of freedom of expression and freedom of the media. And within these laws carried a whole lot of parameters that did not exist before. Under the Kenya Information and Communications Act is the programming code, which media enterprises are obliged to adhere to within their broadcasting and the dissemination of information in order not only to share information, shape opinion, but also collect the information responsibly and preserve the dignity and privacy of the parties that they would be dealing with. Under the Media Bill is the code of conduct for promoting professional and ethical practice of journalists, and within it are parameters that would govern journalists in the conduct of their work. Right. As part of that process was a very strategic move to create an appeals tribunal, which would come in at an appellate level to listen to disputes and concerns arising out of conducts by or against journalists or media enterprises, and should culpability be found, then penalties were provided for.
Right, and the penalties have been actual great issue of concern especially being termed as hefty. 500,000 to an individual journalist, 20 million to a media establishment. When you see a headline like this, blow to journalists as judges give nod to media laws, and also this is the first line of this story by Maureen Kaka, the future of media practitioners remains uncertain after the High Court declared 2 draconian laws passed 3 years ago constitutional. Is this exaggerated, draconian laws?
I think I would say the context needs to be redefined, because within the law is actually a broad range of penalties that can be meted out by the appellate tribunal, starting off with apologies, reprimand, and other ancillary measures that can be made, including even advertising an apology to a party. As a last resort is the financial penalties, which to a media enterprise are a maximum of 20 million shillings, and to a journalist is 500,000 shillings. So it's really not in isolation, as has been brought out in the press. And by the time a maximum penalty is levied under the sentencing policies and the like, there is a lot of aggravating circumstances that would lead to that as a maximum.
You want to comment on this?
She put it very well, but unfortunately I don't think she quite gets our concerns. Our concerns are that, first of all, these proposed penalties are punitive, and in the hands of a regime which is hell-bent on gagging the media, there is no telling to what extent those penalties will be imposed to knock media enterprises out of business or individual journalists out of practice. And the other thing is that there is this overlapping laws. And that is the bone of contention. We have the concept of self-regulation, or even let's call it co-regulation, as Dr. Mongi prefers, under the Media Council Act.
Right.
Now, when you set up another body by ministerial fiat, without reference to an existing arbitration mechanism, then you're going to create a lot of confusion and conflict. Especially because this other body is established under under the political patronage of the cabinet secretary. So it is not subject to the limitations of the Media Council regulations.
Right.
And that is what we say is dangerous.
Before...
And I think there has been issues also about, one, the composition of the Media Council. I think good practice demands that the Media Council be composed of independent persons. Now, they went and changed the law so that it is composed of persons who are subservient to the minister. They changed the laws on the composition of the Media Council. I was talking about the Communications Authority. They changed also the laws on composition of the Media Council, so that, again, it is persons who are beholden to the cabinet secretary. So all that independence flies out of the window.
I'll let Dr. respond to this.
I partially disagree with the guide on the composition of the board of the MCK. Unlike any other, board, what the panel will do is that it is going to select 9 people, the chairman and 8 council members. There is no other way of doing it apart from gazetting the 9 members that the minister will be given. So he's not going to be given 2 per position, no. He'll be given 9 names.
Let me tell you the kind of mischief
yes.
that we can expect.
Let me finish.
Okay, please.
So the other thing is that we would only expect that the nomination of the members of the panel to sit to interview these people will be done objectively by nominating bodies.
Objectively?
Okay. Yes, if it is not done objectively and there is interferences in determining who is going to sit in the nomination panel, then we have the reason to worry.
Let me tell you the kind of mischief
yes.
that can be done. As we were fighting this case, we were also fighting with the registrar of societies, because they had allowed an imposter to go and present himself as the chairman and other members, officials of the Editors Guild. They had actually done that. And we really had to push for that fraud to be reversed. At the same time, the Minister for Communications had composed that selection panel that Dr. Mwangi is talking about. Who was that panel made up? Of imposters handpicked by the Cabinet Secretary. There was somebody there purporting to represent the Editors Guild. There was somebody there purporting to represent the Kenya Union of Journalists. There was somebody there purporting to represent the Media Owner Association. Right. There was somebody there purporting to represent the Kenya Correspondents Association, and all these, and many other nominating bodies.
But you feel they were moles?
They were not even members of any of those associations. They were imposters handpicked. I assume by the Cabinet Secretary of the time.
I have a word on this before I give it back to
yes. As much as the decision came out, I think we need to make a very clear distinction. As much as the High Court say that those two laws are constitutional, it doesn't mean that they meet the test of legislative reasonableness. Because when you look at the two legislation, there's a lot of ambiguities. One, the Media Council Act provides that when a decision is made by the Complaints Commission, someone has complained about an issue, then the the Commission makes a determination. Then the next port of appeal is the High Court. That is the provision in the Media Council Act. Meanwhile, in the Kenya Information Communications Act 2013, it's provided that if a decision is made at the Media Council, then it should be appealable at the tribunal. That is one ambiguity. The second ambiguity, you also find that there is cross-jurisdictional issues. One, the same jurisdiction which has been given to Media Council looking at complaints against journalists and media houses is the same one which has been given to the tribunal. Yet, a decision by the Supreme Court of Kenya in the digital migration case had made it so clear that in terms of regulation of journalists, then the mandate will be with the Media Council of Kenya, while the Communications Authority will regulate issues of spectrum and all that, the hardware stuff. So you find that as it is, these two laws, more importantly the Kika Act, it's not ready for implementation. What should happen? It should go back to Parliament so that all those ambiguities are cleaned up as it is right now.
Maybe on what Okech is saying is that it is also possible that a journalist is likely to suffer double jeopardy, in the sense that someone can bring the case to the MCK, but also take the case to the CA. First instance, not even appeal. CA, the multimedia tribunal can listen case instantly, the first time again at that particular level. Right. But if you look at Kika again, it doesn't talk about the work of that multimedia tribunal as far as the regulation of other hardware is concerned. In fact, it only specifically talks about media and journalists. So basically, its mandate is confined to ethical principles of journalism, because the other aspects and responsibility are not spelled at all in that law.
All right, gentlemen, you've shared your misgivings and reservations. Now, for clarity, at least from your perspective.
Yes, let me clarify. Under the Kenya Information Communications Act, the sole mandate is focused on programming content of media enterprise. It is not our focus to deal with ethical and professional standards of journalists, because there is a body, the Media Council of Kenya, that is empowered and mandated to deal with this. However, at the appellate level, which is at the tribunal, removed from the authority, at that point, issues can be ventilated, either dealing with media enterprises or journalistic practice. And the congruence or the concurrence comes in because journalists of necessity perform on that platform of media enterprises. And this is why the legislation was negotiated in that manner, so that we find that related issues are brought together, that issues relating to a journalist are not ventilated on one platform, and issues are not canvassed for a media enterprise.
You speak of a convergence. You have no view, or you don't agree at all with the issue of cross-jurisdiction?
Yes, these are issues that are cross-cutting, and this is why it was found important that ventilation, especially at the appellate level, should be in a uniform platform to allow for harmony and consistency, and also to prevent incidences of forum shopping.
The gentlemen have questions.
I think I disagree there. First of all, yes, these things were negotiated. The problem is that what was presented to Parliament is not what was agreed at the negotiations. They went behind our backs and introduced new monsters which were not in the draft bill that we had agreed to. So that, it just shows you the kind of dishonesty at play here from the Ministry of Information and Communications, and I assume from Parliament and the government and the executive. That is the problem. Secondly, there is a very clear divide between issues of the practice of journalism, ethics and professionalism, and issues about management of the spectrum. As we are saying, that is technical issues, that is hardware stuff.
And then there's content.
And so they should be completely removed. In any case, why set up a tribunal to monitor the media when there is already the Media Council which is mandated to do that?
In addition,
That is very deliberate.
Right.
Because under KICA, it is easier for the minister to influence decisions.
I'll allow Madam Wanjao to respond to
Come
this.
in again. There was the mention that there is some lack of clarity or ambiguity as to where disputes, where parties are aggrieved, either from the Complaints Commission or the authority where they would go. And indeed, under the KICA, there is provision of access to the Communications and Media Tribunal and the High Court as well, because the High Court is a court of original jurisdiction, and you cannot take that away unless with express provisions of statute. So that is very much in order. And that is a situation that prevails in many other statutes unless we're specifically curtailed.
Right.
So this is something that is not peculiar or unique or vague or ununderstood.
Okay, so then Dr.
Yes, a quick one. Just as the gentleman have said, we had at that time sat in those negotiations. And actually, when you looked at the provisions in KICA, the one on fines, in the original draft, which was there at that time, you will see that the members of parliament had provided that should such fine be levied, then it will be paid to the complainant. So that one is enough to show you the motive was to be punitive and to punish journalists who uncover corruption, who uncover misdeeds of those who are in government.
Right.
So as it is, I think the issue of, and also when you look at Article 34 of the Constitution, says anyone, it grants the freedom of the media, freedom of publishing, and such a person who publishes should not be penalized.
Okay.
Penalizing deals with criminal sanctions. So I think it is very clear something ought to be done about that.
We're getting to wrap up, and I'd want you to address whether there's any recourse in this matter. But Daktari, is it all doom and gloom in terms of this particular landmark ruling, or has it provided a better environment in terms of operations? Media Council?
I think the law, the KICA is very inimical to media freedom, and the fact that the 20 million shillings that is likely to be fined to a media house is going to kill so many small media houses that are growing. A media house, of course, that is not even able to pay salaries, and then it is found to be culpable, then it is fined 20 million shillings. It means that really we are constraining the diversity and plurality of media in our country. That again, for me, it is a big concern. But the fact that the 20 million shillings is going, the 500,000 shillings fined to a journalist is going to be paid to a complainant. It means that Matibia Tribunal is really a court, surely. And we talk about self-regulation. So basically we are saying that it is narrowing the space for journalists to, to practice, as much as they should be held accountable. But I think on my side that the fine is too high for media houses.
But in terms of the commissions being set up and us not being in a state of limbo in terms of Media Council.
The other thing maybe I need to mention is that the people that are going to sit down in Multimedia Tribunal to listen to journalist cases most of them are appointee of the government.
Okay.
How do you have cases of journalists listen to people who engineers and people who have no background on media issues, because that is a composition of Multimedia Tribunal. Right. So that for us is a big concern. But the other thing that is that it gives us some space to recruit or to fill vacancies for the Complaints Commission and the council members, because basically, again, we are unable to deal with the complaints coming from various
such as
sections
the
of
ones that have been
societies.
raised on stories.
So again, that's a kind of an opportunity for us to proceed.
A good side to it.
Yes.
I don't know if she has, just as we close, because I want to know if there's any recourse, at least from the legal minds on the panel, if there's any recourse, or this is an end to itself.
No, this is certainly not an end to itself, because a law by its very nature is an organic tool meant to create norms for adherence. And should there be any concern, laws can always be revised. But allow me to say that perhaps this law is ushering a new dawn for responsible journalism for the Media Council side, and also responsible utilization of the platform for media enterprises. So the high penalties, though are at a maximum, are really coming in as a mirror of what is happening elsewhere, and are really an indicator of raising the bar as we move forward.
In terms of recourse?
I think way forward, I think we'll need a roundtable, media stakeholders roundtable, so that we seek consensus, particularly on the issue of the fines and the cross-jurisdictional issues. And at that time, when the laws unfortunately went to Parliament and they were passed and the President signed them, I think we got some assurances from the chair of the committee that thereafter, when all this storm is passed, we will have a discussion again as stakeholders, and amendments can be effected through the statute law miscellaneous application. Right. So I think a roundtable of stakeholders will help.
Bonamashari, are you convinced this is beginning a new dawn?
No, I think it's taking us back to the dark ages. Obviously, there is room for appeal.
Right.
There is the Court of Appeal, if need be the Supreme Court. So those avenues are not closed, and they're under consideration by the media practitioners and other stakeholders. Of course, there should also be room for negotiation with the ministry and with other interested bodies. What I'm not clear is whether they would be interested, because all this mischief we have seen from them, I'm sure right now they're having very big parties on how they will tame the media.
Right. I don't know if you can confirm this as a last comment on this. You're celebrating this particular...
well, we welcome this piece of legislation.
They welcome.
In the sense that it really begins to mirror a progressive state that really is a comparator with other jurisdictions that we aspire to move towards. And we hope that this will be seen for what it is, and indeed will begin to cause responsibility because of the consequences that will visit journalists or media enterprises that do not comply.
Perhaps a question I didn't ask, but a really quick response. As is, it takes effect, or is there some more development? As is, it's effective?
Yes, it is effective.
So, okay.
It has been effective from 2013, and with the closing of this legislation barring appeal, it is effective.
Because there has been a lot of challenge throughout the years, but now it is effective, unbarred. But hopefully there's some recourse, roundtable, as you say.
Yeah, roundtable.
Thank you, Mercy Wanjao, for joining us and giving your perspective as the Principal Legal Officer at the Communications Authority. Thank you for this. We'll tackle what has been a big story for the last few weeks and still is going into the next several days, especially looking forward to Madaraka Day. There's a lot of debate on how the Madaraka Day celebrations will be carried out and whether CORD will be able to have a parallel rally there at Uhuru Park. And of course, the authorities have remained adamant and strong that no rally will be held at Uhuru Park. Earlier, there was the back and forth as to whether Evangelist Wanjiri will have her prayer day there, but authorities have said there will be no meeting at Uhuru Park. And this, of course, started way back when the first protest against the IEBC, and that is to disband the IEBC, started. And today, of course, gentlemen, the ladies have left us, but today there was no Monday protest, as has been in the last several weeks. But as this story has played out, we had a call early in last week, actually, and there were some reservations, Daktari, that you had in terms of how this story is playing out in the public forum since the clamor for the IEBC disbandment started.
Yeah, I think my concern was widening the conversation to be as inclusive as possible in terms of various stakeholders or people that would give their different perspective and possible solutions. I was saying that can we see the business community come in to see what they think about this issue? Of course, we have seen religious leaders that have also declared their position. And for me, I have a strong reservation about them being the best arbiters in terms of this conversation. Because already they have their own position that they have, Civil society has also kind of, made up their position. They have a clear position in terms of what they would want. Now, the media, in my own view, is one of the most trusted institutions in this country, more trusted than the judiciary in Kenya. can we see the media bring as many people as possible to this conversation? And can we hear many Kenyans say what they would want in terms of the way forward?
But
of course, we have seen many people come in. We have seen, the media has tried to bring many people, to have this conversation going. But the challenge that I have is the kind of very sporadic conversation, so that in between the week there is very little that is going on around this subject, and again come the actual day of protest, there is massive coverage of the issues.
Okay.
So what we are saying, can we see the momentum in terms of this conversation, and can we see various perspectives of the debate?
You mentioned something, and you said confidently the media is most trusted, but as you've seen many castigate different media houses and the angling that they've been giving stories, especially on the versions of the authorities on their policemen who have been hurt, and then the version of the authorities that a particular protester was actually a thief, and people are losing their trust in mainstream media on our objectivity.
I think, as we say about Kenyans, our surnames betray us. So when you see the way people are reacting to the media coverage, those reactions are often tailored by their political leanings, which in turn are discernible from their surnames. But if you take a good unbiased view of how the media has covered this whole drama, I think by and large, it has been responsible. It has been quite thorough. I think all voices, all those who have something to say, something to contribute, have been given the opportunity. If you look at the opinion pages in the main daily newspapers every day, it is full of voices of people offering their suggestions on how this impasse can be resolved. If you look at the activities of the groups that are trying to broker, you might call it a ceasefire, whether it is the churches, the business community, and others, when they speak, I think they have been given very, very good coverage, deserving coverage. But obviously, when there's something dramatic happening like the Monday protests, that is instant news, and that will obviously get prime time coverage and maximum space in the newspapers. That is given. That is the nature of news.
Right. Bwana Okech, can you confirm, Ordinary, as a former commissioner, the complaints commission, especially when it comes to complaints about the objectivity of a media house to a particular, either the government or the opposition, and in your experience, what has happened and what can be expected going closer to the election year?
Well, in terms of these protests, the IBC protests, I think I do concur with my brother, Bwana Gaido, that the coverage in terms of context, contextualizing those protests, it has been fairly balanced, because it has been able to showcase what the opposition was saying and what government was saying in response, and also as well as capturing the other views of other stakeholders. We had the church, we had civil societies. So to that extent, it has been balanced. Save for, I think during that time, save for one print media, where the headline was, it showed tires burning, tires burning, the smoke. So in terms of when that goes out, when that goes out, all right, goes out, in terms of issue of the foreign image of the country, in terms of tourists who may want to come to Kenya, it may kind of scare away tourists who may want to come, and even kind of paint that kind of picture that Kenya is a country under siege.
Right. But let's say you do not show those images, then you're accused of giving a blackout to the protest. Of course, the images of how far, how much destruction perhaps, or how much attention the protests have gotten play into the narrative of one side or the other. But we can't ignore, in the name of protecting the image, if indeed you're being objective, show it as it is, not as you would want it to be.
Yes, I do agree with that, to the extent that you can as well be able to pass that message without overly being sensational on it. Like when you just front, it was actually a full page of showing smoldering tiles, burning a school child who is running, who ordinarily at that time ought to be in school. But despite that one, I do concur that the coverage has been balanced, has been fair. And of course, there were those concerns that with the heightened tension which was precipitated by those protests, it was a situation which threatened to replay similar to the one that happened after 2005. Remember, that time we had a referendum, and thereafter it was heightened politics, it was high voltage politics, and that is what actually got us to 2007. So we were actually staring at such a situation.
Yes, this is the concern that the media, and both Wanagaido and Daktari will respond to this. The media is allowing these images to play out and this narrative to play into the elections, not knowing or either ignoring or not knowing what it would do in terms of elections and whether people would actually fight.
I think this whole thing, this whole initiative obviously has elections in mind. The organizers say what they want is a system that will ensure free and fair elections. They say that if the Electoral Commission is not fixed now, then we are going to be looking towards problems come the elections, because things will go wrong, and that is what can spark violence. So you cannot say that. So you can. It's really not. You can't really say that what is happening now might be a spark to violence. The failure to correct what is wrong is what will be the spark to bigger violence. The other thing is, I had what William said here. The thing is, the future safety and prosperity and security of Kenyans is more important than temporary reassurances for tourists. You cannot sweep things under the carpet just so that you can give comfort to tourists or potential tourists. If there is violence in the streets, that is a fact. You cannot hide it, and even if the daily papers don't carry it, this is the digital age. It will be worldwide, even before the papers hit the streets. So these are not the days where you can pretend there is no problem
and ignore it.
Yeah.
So even what some have actually been calling for blackout, in the sense asking, don't you media understand what this is doing to the national psyche? Why don't you give it a media blackout? But
I think that is absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
I heard that, and one of the voices was from Ezekiel Mutua in his role as
Kenya Films Classification Board.
Kenya Film Classification. First of all, he's completely outside his remit. Secondly, I think that is becoming one of the most dangerous people to freedom of expression in Kenya today, because he seems to have no boundaries, and for him everything must be shut down, shut down, shut down. I think he needs to be put on a reality check.
But blackout is not really feasible.
Yeah, I think blackout is not a solution to this problem. But having said that, one of the big problems I have with the media today is inability to verify allegations.
Okay.
All right? And the speed at which journalists would go to Facebook and to online content from citizens and pick that content and run in the mainstream media without verification. The idea of scooping is gone. It's long gone in journalism. What is now remaining is the ability to tell the truth, because we have multiplicity of sources. I was an audience years back. No, I'm a creator of information. I'm a creator of news. So basically, verification for me is one of the biggest responsibility that the journalists should be able to take on. Number two, I would say that we need some kind of level of responsibility in terms of our reporting. We are saying that it is good, show it out, get out there, give us the truth, but with measure of responsibility. If this nation burned today, for example, it goes down with everyone. What is our role as media?
Right.
Is there a role of media in peace building, in intercultural communication? Is there a role? If there is a role, then what is the role of media when it comes to peace building in a nation?
Right.
You're not saying that we are turning media into
That happened in
preachers and all that
2013,
kind of
some
thing.
say.
But what you are saying is an easier way you can frame your news, the information, in such a way that it reconciles people, as opposed, to inflating the country into a kind of disagreement.
The
and
peace
emotions.
campaign, Masharia.
Yes.
Yes, I agree with Dr. Mwangi to an extent. First of all, the issue of verification. Well, in the coverage of some of these rallies and events, I've seen a lot of reports in the mainstream media where there has been little attempt to seek clarification, to get the facts before going on air or in print. And sometimes I get the feeling we are almost competing with social media. That's somebody who owes no allegiance to any organization or any institution posts something which could be fake. And sometimes you're finding the mainstream media picking that up and almost running with it.
Right.
That you have to be careful about that. Then the issue of peace building. Yes, I agree with Dr. Mwangi that the media has a role to play in cooling down tempers, trying to promote dialogue and reconciliation and all these things. But you do not build peace by pretending there is no problem.
Right.
And I think those are the problems. That is what we have done in the past, where there are issues and you keep mum. Where there are people crying out for justice and you ignore them because you don't want to inflame tensions. It is better to bring them out in the open so that they can be discussed and resolved.
Yes. So the issue here has been that there's credibility concerns over the IEBC, especially raised by the opposition. But there have been some Jubilee MPs who've claimed that we are actually also not all for the IEBC. It is not the work of media to ensure confidence in IEBC, but to portray as it is. So you say, if indeed there is a concern, we can't hide and ignore. But how do we separate from either being part of either side, either CORD or Jubilee, in their clamor? CORD, of course, is saying right now there's no credibility in the referee for the next election, and the Jubilee side is definitely going with the line of constitutionality. As media, you wrote an article about Kenyans needing to know the Constitution. As media, where do we toe the line and play the balance without taking a side?
I think it is simply by recognizing the fact that we are supposed to be neutral, balanced, objective observers and disseminators of that information and news. And we must completely resist being captured by any of the protagonists. But that does not mean you cannot take a position.
Okay.
Every day you see in the editorials in the National Standard or wherever else, they take positions on some issues. If you're taking a position which is for the good of the country, for the good of peace, for the good of security, well and good. That is actually a responsibility to do that. It does not mean you're being partisan. It simply means you have weighed all the options and decided this is the best path.
In your view, is it time?
Nothing to do with either what
Is
God
it time for
favors
media
or
to take a
believe.
position on the IEBC?
I think it
At
is.
this point?
I think it is. And I think the media is going to take a position, and it has already been taking positions. From the time this clamour started, it has been warning, and I think all the papers have, that IEBC and of course the whole gamut of electoral laws and regulations need to be fixed. I think the media recognizes that there is a problem there.
Right.
Now, what is interesting thing is that so there are a lot of people in Jubilee, but then they will oppose any change simply because it is being pushed by the other side. And that is where we are at now,
Right.
where one side says something, the other side must say the opposite.
Okay.
And that is where then you may need a neutral arbiter to come and say, guys, sit down and we're probably on the same side.
Yes. We're in the last few minutes, and Daktari, I'd want you to address the issue of safety of our journalists as Bwana Okech gives his last comment on this particular issue and his desire for media moving forward. On Wednesday, the words of showdown looming will probably headline, be used in one story or another. But how is, in your view, the media meant to carry forward?
I think it should just continue on the same path, and something which I think came out clearly. If a trophy were to be awarded for the human rights defender, it will go to the media, where it was able to actually capture issues of police brutality. It was even able to capture and isolate criminal elements who are harassing innocent wananchi. So I think it did a fabulous job, and going forward, it should remain balanced. It should be able to isolate those facts, and also taking a position and saying that, hey, as a country, we are here, we need to do 1, 2, 3, 4 things for us to move forward.
For us to move forward.
Yeah.
Daktari, safety of our journalists, it seems to be a weekly feature now, depending on how the conversation goes.
I think let me go back a little on what Raido said about taking position as media house. You know, when you take position in this country as a media institution, it is tantamount to supporting a given ethnic community or orientation.
Okay.
And remember what happened sometimes back during the 2008, 2007, where journalists could not, from a media house, could not go and cover story in another particular region. So basically, therefore, it means that even taking a very clear position as media, there is also the risk of jeopardizing, basically, the safety of their own journalists, so to speak. So again, therefore, the media must be very careful in terms of how it is reporting. We don't want journalists from maybe Kameme not to go to Kibera and cover protests there, or go to Madhare. So we are saying that the way the media is also playing their stories also has to do with also the safety and security of journalists, so to speak.
But perhaps the position he speaks of is collective?
Yes.
Media, the editors...
Yes, because already what the position is that today, there are stories you'd read and you know this story is purely, and a journalist with a byline, and you know this story is purely with this particular position. And there are people who would say that Standard is purely anti, you know, or pro, you know. Those kind of binary, basically, is also playing a big role when it comes to safety and security of journalists.
So how do we separate
I think we have to make a distinction between taking a political position, which in Kenya, it's done elsewhere in the world, endorsing candidates. But in Kenya, we're not yet there. We are still too mature. But taking a position on an issue beyond CORD and Jubilee or Raila and Uhuru and Ruto and all that business, that we do all the time. Even on this matter currently, which is on the streets, you go through all the newspapers, Nation, Standard, People Daily, and the Star. All of them have been taking positions on their editorial pages. As opposed, taking a position does not mean slanting the news to cover one side or the other. It simply means saying, we as the Star, this is our position on IBC. This is our position on whether or not there should be a rally on Madaraka Day. This is our position on whether the police should be exercise restraint when dealing with demonstrations.
Yes.
I wish they would be able to come up the way Gaido is saying.
Read the papers every day.
I wish they would be able, but today they are not able to do that. There's a lot of ping-pong journalism that is now playing it, you know, every day.
Really?
Where today there is so much of this, tomorrow there is so much of that. That is coming out evidently. But what Gaido is explaining is quite theoretical, and it's very good if it could be very practical.
It is not theoretical. It is happening. Read our editorial pages every day. There is a position on burning issues of the day from all the newspapers. That is not theoretical. That is not fiction.
What I'm saying, there is that taking of position, but not a position that is not slanted.
All right.
That's what I'm saying. Positions are there, yes, they take position every day, but those positions are slanted.
I disagree.
All right, and I have to end it here. But no one has spoken about the safety of our journalists.
Yes, so on issues of safety of journalists, what MCK is really doing, because it is a very worrying trend, is that we have already an engagement. We do an engagement with the provincial administration and security personnel. For example, now we have a very serious partnership with the Ministry of Interior on safety and security of journalists, because that's a very big concern. And journalist is a human being like any other, and he should be defended. The safety is as important for journalists as it is for
How much would
the
they
other
be
citizens.
faithful and diligent to protecting the journalists if the journalists are critical of them, especially if we question the harsh tone that the CS takes every weekend?
Of course, it becomes a little bit difficult at a time like this, really, to say that we can be able to guarantee total safety.
Are you
of
in a position
journalists.
to push
but what,
a media
but
house
what we can
to-
only be able to do is that, one is that media house must take responsibility of their journalists. All right? And number two is that we must also be able to train journalists in terms of awareness about their own environment and how they should go about covering their own stories. Self-protection and self-awareness basically are critical issues that people should know about as journalists. But media houses must also take a priority in terms of protection of their journalists.
All right, but I have to tell you, many colleagues and others in the
Yes.
fraternity are asking for protection in terms of even equipment,
Yes.
gas masks when they're out with the protest. It's something that needs to be pushed for
You're right.
the journalists. My director is threatening to throw tear gas in the studio on a lighter note. So this conversation continues, gentlemen. Thank you, William Okech. Thank you, Bwana Gaido and Daktari, for joining us in this conversation, and the ladies who were on the other segment earlier. And my name is Mark Masai. Have yourself a good night.